Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I put a trampoline in my backyard in early 2023. I have 3 young boys, and we have enjoyed it immensely. My neighbor Dave, the HOA president at the time, went to sell his house in spring of 2024, and his realtor said the trampoline in my backyard might be a detriment to getting top dollar for his home. So he convinced the neighbor on the other side of my house, Karen, to complain as well. Out of the blue, I received a message from the HOA property manager that the neighbors complained and I would need to submit a form to get it approved. I just don't understand why they couldn't talk to me directly, I told my wife that evening. We've been neighbors for years. That's really disappointing, she agreed, especially after everything you did for Karen's fence. Intermission. What's sad is that I was friendly with both of these people. They had been in my home. They could have talked to me face to face. With Karen, I paid for our shared fence at her request, since her neighbor on her other side wouldn't contribute to their shared fence, another board member and human piece of garbage named Greg. I would have been willing to dig a hole for the trampoline, to hide it more, or purchase a new one with elastic bands rather than springs, to make it quieter. Both of those options are cheaper than getting a lawyer. But nobody asked. Nobody came to me to have a face-to-face, heart-to-heart discussion about their concerns. Hey, we're concerned about the noise and visibility of your trampoline, would have been all it took for me to work with them on a solution. Instead, they went straight to the HOA. A few ironies. These are 5-bedroom homes. Clearly, people with kids are going to move in, and they are going to be noisy in their backyard with or without play equipment. Dave, who sold his home, smoked like a chimney. I don't think my trampoline should have been his top concern. The people who ended up buying his home are a great family with 2 kids, who don't care about toys in other people's backyards. My neighbors have raised kids to adulthood, one of them 2 very active boys. When I pointed this out to Karen, the words that actually came out of her mouth were, "I know it's challenging to raise boys, but we're at different stages of our lives," as if that justified her trying to screw me. "Different stages?" I responded. "So basically your kids got to enjoy their childhood, but mine shouldn't?" She just shrugged and said, "You'll understand when your kids are grown." Back to the story. I filled out the form and sent it in. The Architectural Review Committee denied it a month later. I appealed the decision and met with the board in August. They sent me a letter and said it was in violation. I asked which rules I violated. They never sent me a letter, so I asked again last week. The property manager, Janet, was adamant she had sent the letter, but I asked for proof. She forwarded an email where she put my name in the to field after the fact. I had a strong suspicion it was after the fact due to the following reasons. An HOA meeting was mentioned that never took place. The responses to my questions varied in color, indicating they had been edited at different times. She responded immediately to my request for proof by indicating she would forward the email, but then took an hour, presumably editing a draft she never sent. She cited a rule early in the email, but then cited an additional rule later that superseded the first. The first cited rule could have simply been omitted. The message was not marked as forwarded message at the top, and the sent time didn't include seconds. "This doesn't look like a forwarded email," I told Janet on the phone. "It looks like you just created it." "I absolutely did not," she insisted. "I'm offended you would suggest such a thing." None of these things are a smoking gun, but they are suspicious. I asked the other people in the to field if they received a copy of the email with my name in the address field. The only honest member of the board, Mike, replied he hadn't. The rest remained silent because they didn't want to look like they and the property manager dropped the ball. "I never got that email," Mike told me privately, "but please don't tell them I said that. I'm already on thin ice with the board for questioning their decisions." Intermission. If you're curious why the board didn't like my trampoline, here is the rationale provided in the letter that was never sent. Due to the close proximity of the homes to each other and the small yards, the trampoline is unsightly to the homes surrounding it. Realtors for those homes surrounding you have stated that it is a detraction to selling homes and is lowering the home values of those around it. There have also been neighbor complaints regarding the noise level, which creates those homeowners to be unable to enjoy their homes. They are also unable to use certain portions of their homes while the trampoline is being used. My kids all weigh under 35 pounds. They go to bed at 7 p.m. and don't jump on the trampoline in the morning before 10 a.m. My neighbors bought homes 10 feet away from mine. What did they expect? "This is ridiculous," I vented to my wife. "What exactly can't they use in their homes because of our trampoline? They're binoculars for spying on our yard. I don't think they realize how reasonable we would have been if they'd just talked to us," she said, shaking her head. Back to the story. The year-end meeting was scheduled for yesterday, and 4 board positions were up for election. I got 3 of my friends on the street to run with me. I went door to door every day for a week and spoke with the majority of homeowners about their discontent with the street. I got a third of the community to sign proxy forms stating that I would vote on their behalf. I went to the meeting last night and put these fools on blast. I listed calmly all the ways the current board was failing the community and my plan to right their wrongs. For the past year, I said at the meeting, this board has consistently failed to communicate with residents, has selectively enforced rules, and has prioritized petty personal grievances over community well-being. I made eye contact with Karen and Dave's replacement on the board as I continued. I'm proposing a board that actually listens to homeowners and treats everyone equally. The vote was a landslide, in favor of myself and my friends getting elected. One awful board member, Greg, remains, but he is the minority. We fired the property manager who was uncommunicative and flat-out dishonest. The trampoline endures. I can't believe you pulled this off, my wife said after the meeting. You're basically the neighborhood hero now. I just wanted our kids to keep their trampoline, I replied. I didn't expect to start a revolution. The only bummer is now I have to manage a street which includes some legit crazy people. But this whole episode has convinced my wife that we will never live in an HOA again, which I count as a huge victory in addition to the trampoline remaining where it is today. Next house, she said firmly, absolutely no HOA. I'd rather have a neighbor with a purple house and 6 cars on the lawn than deal with these power-hungry busybodies ever again. Agreed, I said. But for now, let's enjoy our victory and our trampoline. The next one is an entitled people story. I used to work for a small marketing agency that specialized in branding and design work for local businesses. My job was to create logos, marketing materials, social media graphics, and pretty much everything visual that our clients needed. I was good at what I did and I knew it. The problem was that my boss knew it too, but he treated me like I was disposable anyway. My boss was one of those guys who thought he was a creative genius but couldn't design his way out of a paper bag. He'd started the agency about 5 years before I joined, and from what I could tell, it had been barely scraping by until I came along. Within my first year, I'd created award-winning campaigns for 3 major clients that put the agency on the map in our city. We went from a dingy office with 4 employees to a proper studio with 12 people on staff. The thing about my boss was that he had this weird power trip thing going on. He'd micromanage every project, take credit for work he didn't do, and throw people under the bus when clients were unhappy. I put up with it because the work was interesting and the pay was decent, but it wore on me over time. He'd call me at odd hours, expect me to work weekends without overtime, and would lose his mind if I took too long on a lunch break. About 6 months before this whole situation went down, we landed our biggest client yet. It was a restaurant chain that was expanding regionally and needed a complete rebrand. We're talking new logo, new menu designs, interior design concepts, website, social media presence, everything. The project was worth more money than the agency had ever seen in a single contract. My boss assigned the project to me, which made sense since I was the senior designer and had the most experience with restaurant clients. I spent 3 months working on this rebrand, often pulling 12-hour days. I created hundreds of design variations, mock-ups, and concepts. The client loved everything I presented, and my boss was thrilled because this contract basically guaranteed the agency's financial security for the next 2 years. Here's where things get interesting. When I started at the agency, I was desperate for work and didn't really read through my employment contract carefully. I remember my boss rushing me through the paperwork on my first day, telling me it was just standard stuff and I should just sign so we could get to work. I signed everything without really paying attention because I needed the job. What I didn't realize until much later was that my employment contract was incredibly bare bones. It outlined my salary, benefits, and basic job responsibilities, but it was missing something crucial that most creative agencies include, an intellectual property assignment clause. Basically, there was nothing in my contract that explicitly stated the company owned the work I created. In most cases, work created by an employee during employment automatically belongs to the employer under work-for-hire doctrine. But there are exceptions and gray areas, especially when contracts are poorly written. Fast forward to last summer. I'd been working non-stop for almost 2 years without a real vacation. My wife and I decided to take a 2-week trip to visit her family overseas. I gave my boss 3 months' notice about the vacation, made sure all my projects were either completed or in a good place for someone else to handle, and created detailed handoff documents for everything in progress. My boss wasn't happy about it. He made comments about how I was abandoning the team during a busy period, even though I'd specifically chosen these dates because they were historically the slowest time of year for the agency. He tried to guilt trip me about leaving, but I stood firm. I'd earned this vacation, and I was taking it. We left on a Saturday, and the first few days of the trip were amazing. I barely thought about work at all. Then, on day 5 of the vacation, I got an email from my boss. The subject line just said termination of employment, and my stomach dropped. The email was short and cold. It said that due to restructuring and budget constraints, my position was being eliminated effective immediately. I was not to return to the office, and someone would box up my personal belongings and ship them to me. My final paycheck would be direct deposited according to the normal schedule. That was it. No thank you for years of work, no acknowledgement of everything I'd contributed, nothing. I was furious. My wife was upset because it ruined our vacation mood, and I spent the next few hours pacing around the hotel room trying to figure out what had happened. Then I started getting texts from my coworkers. Apparently, my boss had hired someone new while I was gone, someone younger who would work for about 60% of what I was making. He'd been planning this for weeks. The worst part was that the restaurant chain project was about to go into its implementation phase, which meant months of ongoing work and additional revenue for the agency. My boss had waited until after I'd done all the heavy creative lifting to fire me so he could pocket the difference between my salary and the new guy's salary. I was angry, but I tried to salvage the rest of the vacation. It was hard, though. I kept thinking about how unfair it all was, how I'd given this company my best work and got nothing but a cold email in return. When we got back home, I started gathering my things and looking for a new job. That's when I decided to review my employment contract, just to make sure I understood my rights regarding my final paycheck and benefits. I pulled out the old folder with all my employment paperwork and started reading through everything carefully for the first time. That's when I noticed it. There was no intellectual property clause. Nothing that said the work I created belonged to the company. I read through the contract 3 times to make sure I wasn't missing something. Then I started researching copyright law. Turns out copyright law is pretty clear. The creator of a work owns the copyright unless there's a written agreement that explicitly transfers those rights. The work-for-hire doctrine does apply to employees, but the employment relationship has to be clearly established and the work has to be created within the scope of employment. My poorly written contract created enough ambiguity that I potentially had a claim to the copyrights of everything I'd created. I consulted with an intellectual property attorney bringing all my documentation. She reviewed everything and got excited. She explained that because my contract was so vague and because my boss had fired me without cause while I was on vacation, we had a strong case. She also pointed out that I had proof that I was the sole creator of most of the major projects, including the restaurant chain rebrand, because I'd kept all my original files, drafts, and concept sketches. We sent a formal letter to the agency asserting my copyright ownership over all works I'd created during my employment. The letter demanded that the agency cease using any of my work immediately and enter into negotiations for proper licensing or transfer of rights. My boss lost his mind. He called me screaming about how I was trying to destroy his business. I calmly reminded him that he'd fired me via email while I was on vacation and hung up. The restaurant chain got wind of the copyright dispute and immediately put all implementation work on hold. They threatened to sue the agency for breach of contract if the branding materials they'd paid for couldn't be used. Several other clients also started asking questions about whether their materials were affected. My boss tried to fight it, but his lawyer quickly explained that he'd messed up badly. The agency had no choice but to negotiate with me. We eventually reached a settlement where the agency paid me a substantial sum to transfer the copyrights for all my work. It was more than 3 times my annual salary. The agency ended up losing several clients over the chaos, and last I heard, they'd downsized back to almost nothing. My boss had to let go of most of his staff, including that cheaper replacement he'd hired. As for me, I used the settlement money to start my own design consultancy. The restaurant chain became my first major client, and several other former clients of the agency followed. Turns out, when you treat people with basic respect and don't fire them on vacation, they're more likely to want to work with you. The whole situation taught me to always read contracts carefully and to document everything, but mostly, it taught me that sometimes the universe has a funny way of making sure people get what they deserve. My boss wanted to save money by replacing me with someone cheaper. Instead, his shortcut and his terrible timing cost him almost everything he'd built. The next one is a petty revenge story. I might have posted this story somewhere on Reddit when it first happened, but to clarify, this was a few years back in the pre-COVID age, just before Christmas time. Everything that's about to happen is done with a cast and background characters all dressed for winter in heavy clothes. The story. I was on my way home after spending a few months living at a boarding school at the time and was taking the commuter train from the capital to my parents' house. I'd already been traveling by long-distance train for close to 5 hours and was understandably tired. The train arrives, packed up already, and the horde of people pour in. I could have waited 15 minutes for the next train, but it wouldn't have been much better. I get onto the train and spot Karen, 40 plus F, and her 2 kids, 8M. We're taking up a total of 7 seats on a train that would have been crowded, even with 4 more seats free. She made no effort to stop her kids from lying across 2 and 3 seats respectively, even as the train was bursting at the seams with more people standing than sitting. I declared an oath of vengeance, thankfully wearing a big coat and clunky backpack as I was traveling home from boarding school, and took up spot right in front of her, holding on to one of the handles while shoving my backpack and ass in her face. I was probably blocking at least part of the view of her phone. Could I have taken my backpack off? Absolutely. It'd have been crowded, but I didn't have to keep it on in a hot-ass train. I then proceeded to make that 20-plus minute train ride as miserable as I could for that Karen dot. Any shaking or rumble of the train, I accidentally bumped my backpack into her face, stepped on her toes, or swung it in front of her face. About 5 minutes in, she tapped my back and I heard her say, "Excuse me, your backpack is hitting me." As fake apologetic that I could, I turned around, sweeping the straps across her again, and said, "Yeah, it's pretty crowded here, not a single seat left." Felt amazing to just turn back around, ignoring any response she might have given. I didn't care. I was trying to see if I had a fart in store, but sadly I'd eaten healthy that day. I made sure she did not get to enjoy the next 15 minutes of that ride. Even as seats opened up, I kept the spite up. Could I have tried diplomacy? Yeah. But I felt like she didn't deserve the chance to make things right at the time. She had been on the train longer than I had, and it was already full before I got on at the Capitol. Once my stop came up, I remember considering following the train until she got off too. There were only 3 or so more stops, but it would be more time to try and super saiyan some gas through my rectum. But I decided to just get off and head home instead. I did notice her glaring at me through the window as I left, so I flashed her a smile and my middle finger. When I told the story at home, I got mixed responses. Dad was proud, younger siblings praised me as a hero, and Mom thought I was justified until I flipped her off, which TBH I don't understand. I was stepping on her toes and shoving my public transport backpack in her face, but a finger was too far, so I'll accept any judgment here. I've heard from friends, "Oh, you don't have kids." She was probably tired too. You can't just assault someone for being rude. But they're the minority. The next one is a malicious compliance story. It seems that you people love my malicious compliance truck stories, all of which are true, and this one will be no different. In this episode, I am driving the twin-stick R model Mack boom truck, the largest in our fleet. This truck was big, heavy, and it had an unusually wide turning radius. At that time, I delivered construction materials. While we had residential and commercial materials, I often focused on new construction and commercial sites due to the truck being so large. Every once in a while, I would get a residential delivery. Mostly these deliveries I could make from the street without having to pull on the property. This is not one of those stories. So this one day, I am told I am doing a residential roofing delivery to the roof of the house. My radar is now on because I am familiar with the roads in that area and they are narrow. Delivery to the roof means I have to enter the property and get right up to the house. I get loaded and get to the job. As I approach the job site, the road is narrow, barely 20 feet wide. The house is on my left and facing the property, the driveway is on the left. Important in a second. I stop and go find the person in charge. He says, "You're right on time. I need you in the driveway and boom across the roof." I say, "That's great, but there are several issues. One, all the vehicles parked on the street need moved down past the neighbor's house for me to fit down this road. 2, I cannot make the turn from the street onto the driveway without driving across the lawn, backing up 2 or 3 times. 3, I cannot guarantee that driveway can support the weight." He shouts, "I'll move the trucks and you just get your truck in here," in a very demeaning tone. I say, "Okay, I will." As I back down the street to the intersection, turn around, and back up the road, he gets all the trucks moved. I get into position to pull on the property and stop. I grab my clipboard and jump out. I walk up to him and say, "I need you to sign this." We carry legal forms in the trucks that when signed makes the signee or their company responsible for any damage to the property, truck, load, or towing fees to get the truck off site. He signs and all but throws the clipboard at me. Well, okay then, game on. I turn into the yard and pull across the driveway and back up 4 times to get the truck completely on asphalt. Once in the best position I could get, I got out and looked at my handiwork. 8-inch ruts all across the front, 29 feet of yard from the street. Each edge, where the tires went from grass to asphalt or asphalt to grass, the driveway collapsed and the "and" broke away. The rest of the driveway had several 6-inch ruts that were at least a foot wide on most of the driveway. But I am not done yet. I have to put down my outriggers to stabilize the boom. Because the driveway was as wide as the truck meant that when I put them down, they would be in the lawn. I carried large blocks to enlarge the footprint of the outriggers to get stability on soft ground. This left 2 more 10-inch holes in the yard about 3 foot by 4 foot square. I delivered the entire load with no issue. Then the homeowner came home as I was climbing off the boom and started screaming at me for the state of his driveway and yard. I calmly turned and pointed to the job foreman and said, "You need to talk to him," then turned back around and finished wrapping up the truck. I could hear them as they were screaming at each other, but could not understand what they were saying. The final insult, I had to ask them both to move their vehicles so I could back out. And yes, more ruts were made leaving. I paused on the street for a minute to check out my handiwork. It was bad. I got back to the warehouse and the bosses cornered me before I could get into the office. The contractor's boss Gad blown up my boss's phone with threats and complaints. I quickly explained and pulled out the signed affidavit. Boss said, "Well, okay, then we're covered," and I heard nothing more about it. That affidavit has saved my ass a lot over the years, and has afforded me some great and funny malicious compliance over the years. The next one is an entitled people story. So, yesterday's story of Karen and her tour prices from some random blog was quite well received, so I shall endeavor to tell you the tale of another encounter I have had with one of the very same species at another occasion. This story takes place sometime around 2016 plus. A year or two, it's not really important. I was working for a hotel in northern Sweden as a guide. I did all sorts of different tours, including snowmobiling, and for this particular adventure I did a snowmobile tour in the evening with the aim of finding a good spot to see the northern lights, also known as the aurora. This was sometime in the middle of the season, and I'd been out with a group of people on the snowmobiles the previous night, and we had great weather with lots of clear sky and amazing views. And we did see a bit of aurora as well. Nothing spectacular, but what I would describe as slightly above average aurora. It was clearly visible to the naked eye, and you could tell it was slowly shifting across the sky, and of course it showed up great in pictures like it usually does. During the tour, all seemed well. I had half a dozen or so guests with me, and nothing of particular note happened. Nobody crashed the snowmobiles, got stuck in deep snow. Nobody was particularly cold or anything like it. Little did I know of the adventure that was awaiting the next day. The next day, I was in the hotel reception talking to the owner and manager of said hotel, who also happens to do a lot of reception work, and was thus the receptionist of the day. I had already told him the tour had gone well, and we had seen some decent auroras and showed a couple of pictures. I don't remember what we were talking about when Karen walks into the reception. She didn't have the haircut, but she did certainly have the attitude. She starts off nice and calm with telling the owner she wants to talk about the tour last night. Here follows a rough synopsis of what was said. K. The aurora? It wasn't as green as I expected it to be. M. Okay, well, it can sometimes be hard to see the color with the naked eye. K. But wasn't that green? Pointing at a picture on the wall. M. Okay. Well, as I said, it can sometimes be hard to see the color. K. So what are we going to do about this? M. Now looking visibly confused. Do about what? K. The tour, it was very disappointing. M. But you did get to see the aurora, and you got to drive the snowmobiles, and the weather was nice. K. But it wasn't that green. I want to have a refund. M. No, you got... Well, I did mention before the manager is also the owner of the hotel. Let's just say Karen was not pleased to hear that little piece of news. At this point, she is desperate and just keeps angrily telling both of us that she is disappointed in the tour. She wants a refund. We have very poor service. And like a broken record, she keeps saying the same thing again and again for a solid 30 minutes before the manager tells her to leave or he will throw her out. I am pretty sure she threatened to report us to the police for false marketing a few times as well. The owner ends with just telling her, "Good luck with your lawsuit," after she promises to sue us while stomping out. As we were standing there flabbergasted by the sheer guts of this lady, a couple that was sitting in the back of the reception comes out from behind the corner and asks if we get many crazy people like her. Turns out they were also one of the people on my tour the night before. We all had a good laugh at Karen's expense. She checked out the same day, so we didn't see much more of her than her stomping to the train station with her presumed husband in tow carrying all the luggage. With some people going above and beyond it not enough, we should apparently have changed the laws of physics to make the aurora the green she was expecting, or perhaps we should have spiked her lingonberry juice with something to make the colors brighter, who knows, but at the end of the day, it's a funny story to tell people. Anyway,